Hey developers, today we are going to look at components inside Vue.js. We're going to create this really fancy, well not so fancy, but very simple countdown timer. I'm going to show you some best practices when using components, how we can use props to pass things in, and how to get this started. So make sure you stay all the way to the end and you can learn how to create a timer too. Hey, and if you don't know, my name is Eric. I'm a full stack software developer. I'm also the author of a few books, and also I'm a huge Vue.js fan. And just a quick plug, I have this course called Vue 360 from Vue newbie to impressively job ready. It's my full featured course. I put my heart and soul into this course and it's on sale just for a few more days as of this recording. You can see here, as my timer says, only 4 more days. So if you guys are interested and you want to deep dive into Vue.js, you want to learn more and more about it to be literally job ready, then make sure you click the link in the description below and you can learn all about it. So I thought it'd be fun today, since I created this website, I wanted to add a timer, and so I added this timer right here. So 4 days, 4 hours, 58 minutes, and I wanted to show you how to create a timer. Now, as I was doing research for this video, I realized there is many ways of creating timers out there, and I even looked at a few Stack Overflow's articles and some blog articles, and I came up with this way. It's certainly maybe not the only way to do it, but I think it works pretty well, and I like the way it does. So I'm going to walk you through it. Now in this tutorial, I'm going to copy and paste some code just for the sake of time. But at any time, make sure you just click that pause button on the video and you can watch it. And by the way, if you guys like these type of videos, leave a comment below. Let me know what other types of components you want me to do. And also, if you guys like the tutorial, if you don't like the tutorial, make sure you click that thumbs up and leave a comment. That really helps me out for the YouTube algorithm. Alrighty, so let's start here. Now to start this app, I wanted to go ahead and just create a brand new project. So this is a brand new Vue project here. You can see here it has the default hello world, and this is what it looks like out of the box. So what we want to do now is get this up and running and get it working with this component. Now, one thing I wanted to do just to make things easier is I actually installed a Tailwind plugin, so that way I can use Tailwind in this project. If you don't know how to do that, I'll show you guys real quickly. What I did is I have Vue CLI installed, and then I ran, basically I did Vue create, and then the name of the app, so I called it Countdown. And then after I went through all the prompts there, I changed directory into the Countdown folder that I just created, and I ran Vue add Tailwind. And that was it. And the only thing it asked me is if I wanted what kind of configuration files, and it created this configuration file here for me. That's as simple as it is to add Tailwind CSS to a Vue project. So keep that in mind. Cool. All right. So one thing I always like to do when I start is I like to do a little bit of cleanup. So I delete the hello world. Oops, I actually deleted the whole views folder, so I can create it again. I'm going to create a new views folder, and I'm going to create a new file called home.vue. And I'm going to just do a hello world here. And I'm just going to make sure it still looks okay. Cool. So we are good. Cool. So we are good. All right. So let's create a new component. I'm going to call it counter.view, and make sure I'll put capital C here. It's going to be our countdown timer. Okay. So I'm going to type in vbase. And it tells you here, this is actually an extension I have installed called Vue VS Code Snippets. And you can install that by just going through here and installing it. You can just search for Vue Snippets. And I just want to make sure this works. So once again, I'll go hi from counter. And then now I'm going to import that into my home view. So if you remember how to do that, you've got to create a components. And it's an object. And then this is where we want to import stuff in. So I'm going to import in, and you can put this little squiggly line here to signify that it's the root. So we're going to do /components /counter.vue. And then now I should be able to put it in here. And I should be able to put it in here. And I'll go ahead and close it. Oops, actually, instead of the squiggly line, you got to put @. There we go. So hi from counter, you can see here. All right, so now we have the counter being installed in here. But obviously, this is not going to help us because we want to actually have a counter. So let's make some updates to this. So first, I'm gonna add a data object here, and that's going to return back some data. And what we want to display is, if you look at the original counter example, and I'll go back to my course here, we're displaying days, hours, minutes, and seconds. So we want to make sure we display those 4. So we'll create some variables here. Display days. Display days. I just put it 0. Display hours. Display minutes. And display seconds. And it's not going to work because I don't have a root element. So I'm just going to create a div tag. And let's just make sure each one of these works. So display hours, display minutes, display seconds. Cool. So now we have 0, 0, 0. So it's displaying our minutes, seconds, and hours. Now I'm going to go ahead and, just for the sake of time, I'm going to copy and paste the whole look and feel of this. So just give me a second. All right, so you can see here, this is what it's supposed to look like, but obviously it should be iterating. So I'll show you guys real quickly what I did. I'm using a bunch of Tailwind CSS here, but I'm making the text 3XL. I'm using flex, justify center, and then centering the content, making it column. So you can see here, this is hello world's the top, and then here's, I think each one of these is a column. And then I'm centering it, making text center. So this is actually, excuse me, this is information we're going to have here, like by now. That's what that's going to be. And then these are the sections we're talking about. Each section is a different number, and with the information of the colon and also the text. So like this first one, I have flex. The size of it's text 6L. It's justified on the center and it's content center. And then I have a margin right of 2. It's relatively positioned. And then I absolutely position this text underneath it. That way I just kind of wanted to make it sure exactly where I wanted it to be. And then I use bottom 0 just make sure it's the bottom. And then I use leading snug, and that's actually a way to change the height on this right here. So if you look at it, we can take a look at it real quickly. If I can do this right. You can see here, leading snug adds in a line height of 1.375, and that actually moved it up a little bit, so it lines a little bit better with the numbers. And so that's pretty much it. So now we have our numbers, but obviously we need them to actually increment. So this is where we need to do some logic. Now, one thing too is we need to add some props, and we also need to add some computed properties too. But let's do the computed properties last, because we want to actually use this this component anywhere in our app and be able to pass things into it. So I think what a good next step is to add in our computed properties. And so let me do that. So we're gonna have computed. And what we want to do, these are just ways to calculate how many seconds everything is, how many milliseconds everything is. So we know like 1 second is like 1,000 milliseconds, and a minute is going to be we're going to return this dot seconds times 60. So this is just a really easy way of hard coding in some values we need for later on, so that way we can use it throughout our app here to do calculations, so that way that we can change our numbers correctly. I'll show you what that means in a second. Okay, cool. So now we have our computed properties. They're not doing anything right now, but they're in there. And now we want to create some methods. So we're going to create a main method here. And I'm going to call it show remaining. And this is going to do all the logic in our app. And so essentially what we want to do is we want to have an interval that happens every second, and then that counts down. It actually subtracts stuff for us and then displays it. And we're going to do this all through the date function. Now, this is where maybe some of you disagree. There might be different ways of doing it, but we're going to do it through the date function. So I'm going to create a const timer. I'm going to use set interval. And this interval is going to have a bunch of stuff in it. So I'm going to calculate now, which is new.date. So that's the time, that's exactly now. And I'm calculating a distance. And this is going to be, we're going to look at the, we actually have to create a time now. So let's do this. We're going to create a time. We're going to call it end. So this is when it basically, sometime in the future, the countdown timer is going to end. And we need to add a few things into it. So we're going to do new date. And first is the year. So we'll put 2020. And then the next is the month. And actually months start at 0. So 0 is January. 1, 2, 3, 4 is May. So let's say May. And date, today, as of this recording, the date is the 21st. So let's just do tomorrow, the 22nd. And then hour, I don't know, 10, minute 10, second 10, and then milliseconds 10. So that's going to be basically our end date. So to find the distance between the two, we can do this dot, well, basically end dot get time. That'll actually return the minutes, the seconds, the milliseconds since epoch, to time minus the now dot get time. And then we want to check to see, so if the distance is less than 0, then the time is passed, meaning the current time is later than the get and then the time we're going to. So in that case, we're going to do a clear interval timer. That'll stop the timer. And then we probably want to show some message, but we'll deal with that later. So now we have some ways to calculate this, to figure all this out. So we're going to do days. We're going to do floor. That's going to basically round down on it. And we're going to do distance. And then this dot underscore days. So this is essentially what we're going to do to calculate all these values. So hours, we're going to do the same thing. So distance. But in this one, do mod days divided by this dot hours. So I'm going to just do this real quick and I'll add all these in here. Okay, cool. So I went ahead and added it all in, and I'll show you what you guys I did. So these are just calculations. In fact, I looked this up. I found a few articles on this. But essentially what this does is remember this dot underscore days is basically how much a day is in milliseconds. So it's taking the distance that we know is the time that we're going to minus the time that's now and dividing it by distance and using the floor, so it kind of rounds it down to a whole number, and that's the way we get the days. And that's how many days it is. And then we do the same thing with hours. We use days, but we divide it by the number of hours in the day. And then we take the hours divided by the number of minutes and the minutes divided by the number of seconds to get seconds. And then the next thing I did is to actually update the display minutes, seconds, hours, and days. I wanted to assign these 4 values, but I also wanted to make sure that if it's less than 0, it adds that 0 to it. So that way, instead of having it go 10 and then instead of saying 9, it goes 10 and then 9. So I did this really quick ternary operation where if it's less than 10, then add the 0 to it. Otherwise, just return seconds and minutes. And I did that for all of them. So that's it for that. Let's see if it actually works. I'm going to use the mounted lifecycle hook. I'm just going to start the show remaining. And let's see if it works. Cool. So now we can see you have 14 hours, 48 minutes, 4 seconds. So definitely we've gotten it working right here. But we can also let's change the date right here. So instead of let's say we put it a year in the future. Cool. So now it has 365 days. Yeah. So this seems like it's working. There's a few things we can do to kind of make it a little cleaner. You can see we're kind of using the same format here over and over again. And this begs, whenever you're copying and pasting code and it looks exactly the same, it's probably a good idea to refactor it out into its own method. So I'm going to create a new one called format num. I'll put num in here. And that's just going to return num less than 10, then use 0, otherwise num. So that's essentially doing what it's doing here, but I'm passing in format num there. I guess I could do this as a one-liner. So now I have format num here. Let's see here. Let's change it. You can see in the seconds, we want to make sure it works out correctly. So I'm going to delete this. I'm going to put format num and then pass in the actual seconds in here. Oops, we got to do this dot format num. Okay, it's still working. Let's see what happens if it gets to less than 10. It should work. So 20, 19. All right, cool. So it's still working. So we know we did it right. And so now we could just update all this. All right, so it's just a little cleaner. Still working, no errors. That's good. So yeah, so now we've cleaned it up a little bit. Now we want to have this be a little bit more useful. Like this end date is hard-coded in here, but we want to actually be passed in to make this more useful. Because anytime you create a component, you kind of want to think of creating a component like you want to use it without throughout the app, and it might be used in a library at some time. So the easiest way to do that, and probably the first step of doing something like this, is add a props attribute. So props, and the props, we can either do it in as array or an object. I'm just doing it as array. So I want to add in year. Cool. So now we have all of them in here. And one thing I wanted to do on my computed properties is take the end. I'm going to create something called end, and it'll just add all those into a date object. So I'm going to return a new date. Cool. So now we have these props. So now we can essentially, when the app is started, we can create, we can set this all up. So instead of having this end right here, we can do this .end.getTime. Now this is going to break because we haven't done a very important thing here. Is in the home component, we need to actually pass everything in. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, cool. So now we have added in the countdown. So with everything in, I'll put 2020, date 25, and then I'll just save it here. And let's see if it works. All right, so it says 4 days. Looks like it's working. Now there's a few things also we can do to make this a little bit more versatile. You can see here when I refresh it, it turns to 000, and then it kind of loads. So one thing that I did to kind of fix that is in this section, well actually right here, I can put ng if loaded, and then I'll create a new data property called loaded and put it to false. And if I just do that and refresh it, it's just, you won't see anything. So I want to make sure it loads first. So I'll do this dot loaded equals true. So that way the first time it loads, it'll actually appear after it's done loading. Oops, this is supposed to be vif. I think in Angular days. Cool, so now there it is. So you can see it doesn't appear until the numbers appear, which is good. You can also add a message once it reaches 0. So to do that, we just need to, under this section right here I kind of added that was empty. I had this by now. I can do another vf, so I could be like, I don't know, I'll put an h5 here, by now. If I spell that right, by now. There we go. And then I'm going to do a vif not expired, and then I'm going to create a new one, a velse, which will say timer is done. Now I just have to create this expired, which if we go back down here, so I'll add a new one in here called expired, and I'll have it false. And what I can do here is this right here, I can do this dot expired equals true. You can see it doesn't change anything now, but let's change the timer, and now we can easily do that. Let's say we know that's 4 days, so it's 21st. All right, so if we go 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so it changed the text to timer is done, and now it's done. The only problem with doing it this way is now if I refresh it, you don't see anything because it's the timer's done and it never ran. So the loaded never gets set to true. That's fine in my circumstance, but I'm sure if we wanted to, we could figure out a way to have it load when the number's displayed, but if this is expired, leave this to true. I guess we could do like loaded equals true here. And now if you refresh it, you could still see it, and it says timer's done, but the numbers are all 0. All right, so that's it. So this is a lot to take in, but you know, here's all the code, so feel free to copy it. I'll leave a link in the description below. Let me know what you think of this timer. I mean, certainly if I was going to put this in a production app, one other thing I might add in is some defaults. I'd probably make this an object instead and add some default numbers in case I didn't want to always pass in milliseconds. Maybe just default milliseconds to 0 or default seconds to 0, so I don't have to pass that in. I might also pass in this text right here at the top. Maybe I don't want to always have it default to this. Maybe have it a little bit more versatile by passing in my own text. Yeah, I could see stuff with things like that. I could also even be more creative. Maybe I only want to do days and hours and not minutes and seconds, and I can add some more props and things I can pass in for that. So let me know what you guys think of the counter below. I really appreciate it. Thanks.